okay, the whole reason to solve, so we spent the first two sections learning how to solve systems of linear equations. And those were leading up to 3.3, which is the big section in chapter 3. This is applications that involve systems of equations with either two variables or three variables, as unknowns are our variables. And those are what we usually want to solve for. Alright, so these are applications. And so we're going to be giving applications. We'll have to set up a system and then solve. And you can solve using any method. Well, I'm going to use the matrix method. Alright, so whenever you're dealing with applications, you first should read the problem carefully. Either mentally list what's unknown and what's known, what your given information is, or physically list it. Sometimes it's helpful to do that. Assign variables, and all of these applications will either have two variables or three variables. Those are what you're looking for. I want to find the x, I want to find the y, I want to find the z. So whatever the application's asking you to find, whatever your unknowns are, that should be your variables. And again, our applications have two or three, so there should be two variable terms or three variable terms. If you have two variable terms, you should be able to come up with two equations. If you have three variable terms, you come up with three equations. You have to have the same number of equations as unknowns in order to solve the problem. Alright, so that's step 2. Step 3, which is the hardest part. Creating the equations, and again, plural, you have to have two or three, using either formulas that you know or information that's given, provided for you. Right? You come up with the equations based on what you know, the given parts. Sometimes it's helpful. We'll actually do specific examples towards the end where setting up a table is going to be key. All right, setting up a table is going to be helpful. And then you can always double check by plugging in values. If you're unsure if you found the right equation, check your answer. Pick a value and plug it in and make sure it makes sense in the application. If you've got two variables, you need two equations. If you have three variables, you need three equations, and that should be two equations. All right, you have to have so if you had four, we're not going to, but if you had four variables, you'd have four equations, five variables, five equations. You have to have the same number of equations as unknowns. Then we'll solve it. Technically, you can solve it using any method you want. I'm going to use the matrix method because then I can't mess up the algebra. Just plug it into the calculator and go, but I do have to have it set up correctly in order to do that. And the setup sometimes the hard part. Alright, so the first couple of examples are two variable cases. So I'm going to kind of break them into little segments working on applications. Alright, so we've got Luke. He's got Coca-Cola stock and Wendy's stock. Coca-Cola stock is currently selling for $40 a share. Wendy's is selling for $8 a share. His current investment in both stocks, so his total investment, $6,720. And he has 360 stocks. How many of his stocks are Coke and how many of his stocks are Wendy's? So it's up to you. But what you're looking for are your variable parts. So I want to know, out of the 360 stocks, how many are Coca-Cola and how many are Wendy's. I know the value of each and I know how much it's total. And I'm going to use those to set up equations. And so I'm going to let C be the Coca-Cola stock. You can just do X's and Y's if you want. I'm going to let W be the Wendy's stock. All right, and those are my unknowns, right? That's what I'm asked to find. I want to know how much Coca-Cola and so those are my variables, my unknowns. Now I come up with two equations. First equation is going to come from, I know, if I take the Coca-Cola stocks, add it to the Wendy's stocks, it should add up to a total 360. So my first equation is C plus W, Coke stocks plus Wendy's stocks, have to add up to 360 total stocks. Then the second equation is the value of the stock, right? If I sell my Coke stocks, they're worth $40. So every Coke stock has a value of $40. So the Coke stocks are worth 40 times however many there are, C. Wendy's are worth $8 for every single one they have. So 8 times the Wendy's stock. When I add up the value of all the Coke and all the Wendy's, it should add up to 6,720. And there is my system. Now I plug it into my equation and I row reduce. So 360, 48, 6,720, RREF. And all of these will be one solution cases. Alright, so when it reduces down to 100, 120, 01, 240, and so there's the Coca-Cola, and there's the Wendy. So he has 120 Coke stocks and 240 Wendy's. And you can check it out, just a quick thing. Those should add up to 360, and they do. 120 plus 240 adds up to 360. So you do a quick check that at least the answers are reasonable, and those are the correct answers. My second example. All right, we have two different types of perfume that are produced. The company makes cheap perfume, and it takes 9 units of filler and 4 units of fragrance. So that means if you're in essential oils, there's a carrier oil and then there's your fragrance oils. Most of it is carrier oil, meaning there's no fragrance involved. Then you put in a little bit of fragrance, and that's the way also perfumes work. There's this filler, all right, and then the fragrance. Because if you had all fragrance, it would be too much, and a lot of times the potency can also be damaging if it's too much. Alright, so the cheap stuff has 9 units of filler, 4 units of fragrance. The luxury has less filler or more fragrance, so it's more potent. 3 units of filler and 8 units of fragrance. Last week, the company used 3,000 units of filler, 3,300 units of fragrance. How many bottles of cheap did they manufacture? So I just want to know the bottles of cheap perfume. But I have to find both in order to get there, right? There's two things I don't know. I don't know how much of the luxury, and I don't know how much of the cheap. The final answer is the cheap, but I'm going to find both of them. And so it's up to you. I'm going to do X's and Y's this time. So X is going to be what I really want to find, which is the bottles of cheap perfume. So bottles of cheap. Y is going to be the bottles of the luxury. Alright, then it has to do with how much filler and how much fragrance. And so I've got my total filler and my total fragrance. Alright, and so when I'm making my bottles of perfume, well, I use up so much filler when I make my X bottles of cheap and my Y bottles of expensive, and so I go find out how much. When I cheap, 9 times each one of those, and my luxury filler is 3. So there's my filler, right? I had to use my unit. So Y is the luxury, it uses 3 units of filler. X is the cheap, and it uses 9 units of filler. And now I do the fragrance. So again, I'm going to do X and Y, but use the fragrance. So 4 units for X, 8 units for Y. And so 4 for X, 8 for Y. And so again, double check. Fragrance, the cheap stuff, which is the X, uses 4 units. The expensive stuff, which is the Y, uses 8 units. And then that's how much filler. And so there is my system of equations, in which once I've got, that's the hard part. Once you've got that set up, plug it into your matrix and reduce. R-R-E-F. And again, it'll always come out in the one solution case. Alright, so X equals 235, Y equals 29. And I found both. But again, read the problem carefully. So a lot of times they'll do this on the homework. Sometimes they'll only ask you for one of them, so you have to make sure you give them the right one. They ask for the cheap perfume, which is the X value, and so the answer, same thing on quizzes in the final exam, the answer is they make 235 bottles of the cheap stuff. They made 295 of the expensive, but they didn't ask for that. I found it, I needed it in order to get to the questions, the final answer, but this is the one that you would give in the, either, again, the answer on the quiz, the answer on the test, final exam, and homework. My mind went blank. Alright, so we'll stop there. Again, I'll pick these up in the next video. Sorry about that, guys. I kind of went blank there. And so we'll just continue. So where I stopped off is where I'll start the next video.